3 players that you could steal on draft day that have a massive upside, and a signed Jalen Waddle jersey to give away? It's going to be a good day. There isn't a better feeling in fantasy football than having a guy that you selected after round 3 just totally pop off and give your team that added boost that it needs. Even just last year, guys like Josh Jacobs or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Because the 3 guys that we're talking about today have some serious upside if all things go right for them here in 2023. But like you saw in the opening, the giveaway season is upon us, and thank you to our friends over at Pristine Auction because they've hooked us up. Just the other day, I unboxed $5,000 worth of signed memorabilia from Pristine Auction. If you missed out on that video, there's a pinned comment down below with a link that you can check it out. We'll also throw the thumbnail right there. Put it right there for a second. Taylor, go look what we have as upcoming giveaways. Absolute fire. So how do you become eligible for all these giveaways, including in this show for a signed Jalen Waddle jersey right here? Well, it's super simple. Hit the like button on the video, subscribe to the channel so you know when these upcoming giveaways are going to happen, and then create a free account over at pristineauction.com. It doesn't cost you anything. Just be sure that you put the referral code as headliners when you sign up, and we'll also throw a little coupon into your account in case you decide on winning an auction in the future. They have everything you need for anything you want to collect. It's not just football memorabilia, it's every sport. It's movies, it's TV. They have you covered over there. So as soon as this video gets 1,200 likes, I'm gonna give away this bad boy right here just to somebody down below in the comment section. So hit the like button, leave that comment below, set up your free account. The more people that go and set up free accounts using the referral code headliners, the more stuff they send that I can then give away to you. So make sure you go do your part. And now let's talk about a few draft day steals that have massive upside in 2023. And you better believe we ain't bringing no half-ass opinions to the table today. I got tons of facts, so be sure to have your pen and paper out, class, because we're going to fantasy school. The first player we're talking about is Jamir Gibbs, currently running back 16 overall in the consensus rankings. Now, Gibbs is pretty freaking intriguing if I'm being honest. If it were my draft, if I started solid, if I felt like I started with some solid pieces that weren't overly full of risk, Gibbs is 100% in play for me as my running back 2 overall. I mean, why would he not be? If this wasn't the year that Bijan Robinson came out and all the hype that surrounds him, we'd be talking a whole lot more about Jamir Gibbs, who's kind of flying under the radar right now. But look at this. He was a top 12 pick overall in the NFL draft. He's going to run behind one of the best offensive lines in all of the NFL. Detroit was also a top 5 overall offense in the NFL just last season. But what's most important is he's going to be overly involved in the passing game, and that is just going to boost his weekly safety, right? So even though there's some unknown there with Jamir Gibbs, we're going to get that built-in pass catching work that's going to give him that safer floor, so he can't really hurt us as much if he isn't somebody who just pops off right away. Now, sure, David Montgomery is going to be there, and he's going to get a lot of work on the ground and around the goal line. We kind of know that. We can expect that in Detroit. But we're going to see Gibbs not only just in the backfield, but lined up in the slot at times as well, and that should make you very excited from a fantasy perspective. There is no way that an NFL team spends a 12th overall pick on a running back when they already have a running back that they brought in free agency in David Montgomery if they don't plan on using him a lot. So let's do what we do best. Let's build some projections, right? Because fantasy football is, yes, a lot of luck. Anybody who says that it doesn't involve luck is straight lying to you, but it's also about playing the probabilities and the percentages and building these realistic projections so you know what kind of upside you potentially have. So let's look at Jamir Gibbs here. Now, last year, Detroit running backs had 115 targets. But I really expect that number to climb a little bit here in 2023. Don't forget, like usual, DeAndre Swift was hurt at times last year and didn't have that opportunity for more targets. We saw more Jamal Williams when he was down. Jamal Williams really wasn't one of those guys that's going to rack up receptions, so I do expect a slight increase in the amount of targets going to the running backs. Now, of course, David Montgomery is going to be involved in that too. He can catch passes. Is he going to be the main guy catching passes? No, not at all. I really expect more of a 75-25 split when it comes to pass catching work in this offense for the running backs. So even if the running back targets only increase by 10%, just 10% overall, that's going to take the total to 126 targets going to running backs. As we just said, I'm expecting a 75-25 split, so 75% of the targets going the way of Gibbs would lead him around 90 targets on the season. That sounds pretty realistic. The best running backs in the league have a catch rate of right around 80 to 85%. But he's a rookie. Can we really just label him as one of the best this early? So let's give him a catch rate right around 75% because we do know he has great hands and the ability to catch the football. So with 90 targets, that means Jamir Gibbs is going to end up with right around 67 receptions. Now, the average yards per reception for a pass-catching running back in the NFL is going to be right around 9 yards. So if we factor in that 9 yards per reception over 67 receptions, we get 603 receiving yards. That right there between receptions and yardage is 93.8 half PPR points. But now let's look at the rushing totals, and we know this is where David Montgomery is going to get the lion's share of touches. See what I did there? Lion's share? Never mind. All right, last season, the Lions ran the ball 480 times, but right off the top, we need to cut out about 15% of those carries that are going to account for quarterback scrambles, wide receiver end-arounds and carries at times with Amon-Ra, and you know there's going to be touches that go around to the third-string guys at some point throughout the season. It happens every year. Well, if we take off that 15%, that's going to leave us 408 carries to split between David Montgomery and Jamir Gibbs. But like we said, we know that David Montgomery is going to have the advantage on the groundwork, right? So I'm really expecting David Montgomery to dominate the touches on the ground in the form of maybe a 60-40 split. Well, 40% of the 408 carries we have available is 163. Now, if we add up his reception total and his carry number, that gives him 230 total touches on the season, which is very reasonable. Once again, we're not going to go nuts here, right? We're trying to be realistic. Now, in college, he averaged 6.1 yards per carry. But in the NFL, that stat would be absolutely bonkers. Anything over 5 is great. So let's really just slow play this a little bit and say that he's going to hover right around 4.8 yards per carry. I expect that number to be higher, but we're being realistic here. 163 carries at 4.8 yards per carry is 782 rushing yards, 78.2 half PPR points. So that's going to bring our total so far up to 172 half PPR points, and we haven't even talked about touchdowns yet. But we all know that touchdowns are almost impossible to predict. Now, just last year, the Lions had the NFL leader in rushing touchdowns in Jamal Williams. The team overall rushed for 23 touchdowns on the ground. So let's look at it this way, right? On average, the running back 12, due to historical data that we use, it's in our draft guide, I've shown you here before, the running back 12 overall averages 206.9 points per year in half PPR scoring. So if we're trying to get inside the top 12, we got to beat that 206.9 number. Well, that's a difference of 34.9 points or 6 touchdowns. That seems pretty realistic just for him to get inside the top 12. But what about the top 6? Well, on average, the running back 6 scores 242.1 points per year. That would be 12 touchdowns. And I really feel like this is where we're going to see that sweet spot. Somewhere between running back 6 and running back 12, if everything goes right. It's going to come down to touchdowns. But I think we can all agree with almost 1,300 total yards, close to double-digit touchdowns in this offense. We could be looking at a guy that we get outside of the third round that has top 10 potential at the position. And remember, some of these numbers, they're a little conservative. Like, what if he exceeds that 4.8 yards per carry? We have nowhere to go but up. I'm absolutely loving myself some Jamir Gibbs. But remember, you had safety at the beginning of your draft, right? You got a solid building block, and now is your time to take a risk. Jamir Gibbs is that guy, probably in the 4th round. All right, what about Calvin Ridley, wide receiver in Jacksonville? And there are very few players right now that I am more excited about this year than Calvin Ridley. A lot of people got worried with some camp news here earlier that he was going off the field with the trainers and he was limping a little bit. He had a cleat issue and he should be good to go. He was more comfortable after the change. But Everyone can crap on this guy. I don't feel like a lot of people love Calvin Ridley, but I'm the type of person that I believe in second chances, not just for fantasy football, but for humans overall. And I can't look away from the talent that Calvin Ridley possesses. A lot of people, I believe, have forgotten how good this guy was and probably still is. In 2020, he had 143 targets, 90 receptions, 1,374 yards, and 9 touchdowns. He finished as the wide receiver 4 overall and missed a game that season. The Jags then pulled a brilliant move and traded for Ridley last year, kind of setting themselves up for the future. They knew he was suspended last year. They knew he couldn't help them last year, but they knew that in 2023, he could give their offense a huge boost. He now joins a top 10 overall passing offense in the NFL in Jacksonville. It's not very often that a top 10 overall passing offense gains a wide receiver 1 in the offseason without losing any of their key pieces from the prior year. Plus, there's also other weapons in this offense to take away some of that defensive attention. It's not just going to be Calvin Ridley. They have to worry about Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne. There's options here in Jacksonville to really make the defense have to work a little bit. Plus, he has a young quarterback that took a huge step forward last year by improving in almost every statistical category in Trevor Lawrence. Now, maybe you need even more reasons to understand how good Calvin Ridley could be. Well, just listen to how many categories he finished in top 10 at the position for his last full season played in 2020. Targets, receptions, receiving yards, air yards, deep targets, red zone targets, touchdowns, fantasy points per game, and yards per route run. Now, what really stands out there for me, some of those deep ball metrics, right? Last year, Trevor Lawrence was a top 10 quarterback in air yards and deep ball attempts. So I expect some big plays at times between this duo of Ridley and Lawrence in 2023. But let's build these projections once again. We're going to be doing this for all these players because I really believe it paints the picture the best. Now, a lot of people are going to look at this roster overall in Jacksonville, and they're going to struggle to find enough targets for Calvin Ridley to explode. But there's a path here to at least right around 130 targets in this offense. Marvin Jones is gone. That right there, right off the bat, that's going to free up 81 targets. Zay Jones, probably going to be the guy that takes the next biggest hit along with Christian Kirk. I don't see Zay Jones getting anywhere near his 121 targets that he had in 2022. If he reaches anything close to 100, I'm going to be shocked. And that right there is an easy 100 targets, and we haven't even talked about anybody else. 120 to 130 targets, very doable. Now, with 130 targets with a career catch rate of 65.3%, that's going to put him somewhere in the neighborhood of 85 receptions. Now, his last season in 2020, he averaged 15.3 yards per reception. Next level. The guy can separate, he can get open, he can beat you deep. But we're being a little bit conservative. So let's drop that number down to 14.5 and just shoot it a little lower just in case. Well, 14.5 yards per reception for 85 receptions comes out to be 1,232 receiving yards, and also a total of 165.8 fantasy points before we even look at touchdowns. But just like we did with Jamir Gibbs, too hard to predict touchdowns, so let's see where he falls with some different touchdown totals. If we want Calvin Ridley to finish inside the top 15, he would need 5 touchdowns. Inside the top 10, 8 touchdowns. Do we want him inside the top 7? He would need 10 touchdowns. Now, if we don't include 2021, which is the year he got hurt and only played in 5 games, the previous 3 years, he scored 26 touchdowns, which is an average of 9 touchdowns a year. Oh yeah, and during that span, he was fighting Julio Jones for targets. If the stars align, we could see Calvin Ridley become a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football once again. You could get him at the very end of the 4th, beginning of the 5th in some drafts this year, and Calvin Ridley has ridiculous upside if you're willing to take that draft day risk on him. But let's go a little bit further down the list, right? Somebody who's a little bit later. I need to talk about Michael Thomas, who's currently wide receiver 43. And y'all know me, right? I've been doing this for a long time. I've made thousands of videos. You know that I am the furthest thing away from being a Michael Thomas truther. Even at the pinnacle of his production, like 2018, 2019, I didn't overly love the guy. So for me to include him in a video like this, it has to be for a very good reason. Now, it really comes down to two things here for Michael Thomas, right? The price is great. Absolutely love the price. You don't have to pay up for Michael Thomas anymore. Too many people have been burned for too long. And then health. Is this guy going to be 100% healthy heading into the season? Because right now, currently at wide receiver 43, because last year's wide receiver 43 was Courtland Sutton, and he only scored 127 fantasy points overall, had a horrible offense that couldn't score, below average quarterback play from Russell Wilson, dealt with some injuries himself. It was a bad year. And that's where they have Michael Thomas kind of right now. We aren't drafting Michael Thomas at his ceiling anymore. Now, for the first time in forever, we can get him at his floor and really hope for that ceiling. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't hurt us. And this is a good thing because we're talking about a guy who has missed 40 of his team's last 50 regular season games with ankle injuries. But a lot of this is going to come down to the improvement at the quarterback position. I get it. So many people still dislike Derek Carr. But honestly, all the arguments I ever see against Derek Carr make no sense whatsoever when it comes to fantasy football terms. And really, I just think a lot of people are blinded by their bias of either the Raiders or Carr in general. Now, I'm on record this year with talking about how good of a deep ball threat quarterback Derek Carr is and how that really suits the skill set of another wide receiver on this team, Chris Olave, and it still does 100%. But stop looking at Michael Thomas and expecting the wrong things. Thomas was and always has been a volume guy. He's not some deep ball, overly efficient wide receiver in this offense. He never has been. For his career, Michael Thomas has only averaged 11.6 yards per reception. Chris Olave just last year averaged 14 and a half. Thomas made his money in volume. Short, slant boy, right? Everybody call him slant boy, but that's fine because that's going to rack in some volume. And in 2022, I'm all in for a bajillion slants if that's what it takes. Let Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed eat down the field deep and then just pepper Michael Thomas underneath to move the chains. Now, that's why it's great to have a quarterback like Derek Carr. He's a volume passer as well. He's not somebody they really have to pull the reins back and say, listen, dude, we don't want you to throw the ball a whole lot. You need to manage this game. No, he hasn't had a season in his career where he hasn't thrown at least 500 pass attempts. And it doesn't matter how many games he's played over his career in a season either. 15 games, 16 games, 17 games, didn't matter. Over 500 pass attempts in all of them. There should be more than enough volume to go around in New Orleans for Michael Thomas to get the volume here. Once again, he's going to have a solid target share if he's healthy. But let's also not forget about Alvin Kamara either, right? We may be without Alvin Kamara for a portion of this season. We've seen in this offense before in New Orleans when either Kamara or Thomas is out, the other performs at a very high level. But like we've done for the other guys, let's look at some of these projections and keep them realistic, because this one's going to be a little bit tricky if I'm being honest. Really hard to project a guy for 17 games when he's missed so much time over the last few years. That would be careless. So we're talking about a guy who's had over 140 plus targets in the 3 years prior to injury. Now, does he get anywhere near that? Hell no, I'll faint if he does. I'll be pumped, honestly, if he hits 100 targets this year, and I really think that number is more doable. Like I said earlier in his career, his average yards per reception were 11.6, and when he's healthy, his catch percentage has been anywhere between 80 and 85%. So let's just go with the lower number of 80%. That would give him 80 receptions on the year. 80 receptions at 11.6 yards per reception is 928 yards, a total of 132.8 half PPR points. Hell, with that number right there, he's already passed Courtland Sutton in his wide receiver 43 tag of just last year. So now, once again, it's going to come down to touchdowns. At 132.8 fantasy points per game with 0 touchdowns, puts him in the neighborhood of wide receiver 33 overall. So we've already gained 10 spots for where he was drafted. Now, in order for him to get all the way up inside the top 24, he would need 6 touchdowns. Very doable. Top 20, he would need 8 touchdowns. If we could get this guy 10 touchdowns this year, he's flirting with top 15 wide receiver numbers, but I do think that that is a little bit high. That 8 touchdown total, a lot more doable, and potentially a top 20 wide receiver that you get at the back half of your draft. And that's what really is the most important thing here. A lot of people are going to be like, oh, this guy's late, 928 yards, that isn't enough. You're missing the entire point here. You're drafting this guy at a point that you're not reliable on him. You're not even going to start him week 1 more than likely. He's going to be on your bench. Remember, he's wide receiver 43 right now. You should never be reliant on a player that late in your draft unless you have some massive starting lineup that you need to fill. But if he does end up playing at that top 20 wide receiver level, you have trade bait with name value. You have a weekly flex play. You have a bye week fill-in. You have an injury replacement if needed. And if all else fails and the same old happens and he gets hurt and goes down again, it doesn't hurt your team because you're getting him so late in the draft. That's the case, you throw him on IR, you drop him, you pick somebody else who's popping off the first few weeks of the season. It's a win-win either way. You have to remember that not all players need to score within the top 10 at the position to have value. If Michael Thomas comes out the first month of the season and has a string of good games, a lot of people are going to start buying back into Michael Thomas, and you will be able to flip him in a trade for anything that your team needs. A bench stash for you could turn into a starting piece if you have some other hole somewhere else or a player that goes down. That's where we're looking at the value for these guys later in drafts. But I also want to leave you with a couple other names that you need to start looking into yourself, because I'm going to cover them in some upcoming videos. Some other guys that could kind of fit this mold that we discussed here today. And those 3 guys are going to be James Cook, the running back of the Buffalo Bills. We have Jordan Addison, wide receiver in Minnesota, and then Darren Waller, tight end in New York. Those are definite names that you need to pay close attention to, and then I'm going to cover more in depth in some upcoming shows. So do me a favor, hit the like button. Remember, we got to hit the like button because I got to give away this signed Jalen Waddle jersey to somebody down below in the comment section. So you already got to leave your comment anyway. If you enjoy the content, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. There's still like 40% of you out there right now watching the videos that aren't subscribed to the channel. That needs to change so you don't miss any of the upcoming content, because we're going to win ourselves some fantasy titles up in here this year. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, and then do your part to make the world a better place.